Donald Trump's British free speech crusade continues. The president has quietly sent a 5-person team from the US State Department to investigate Britain's censorious government and the perilous state of free expression in the United Kingdom. This will no doubt be welcome news to Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer.
Thanks, Donald.
But what does this really mean? We're going to get into it and my personal opinions and much more. Before that, I ask if you want to support this channel and our work, make sure you like and subscribe and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Now, the erosion of free speech in Britain has been a growing concern for years, turbocharged by Starmer's Labour government, all of which has garnered global attention from voices like Elon Musk highlighting cases of people locked up for tweets. There's been political outcries. Police are now making as many as 30 arrests a day for so-called offensive online messages. This month, a retired police officer was arrested for warning about the threat of anti-Semitism on social media and had his Douglas Murray books rummaged through as a consequence. Even mainstream outlet Bloomberg published a headline reading, "Britain's free speech retreat can't be denied." As The Telegraph reported, Trump sends a free speech team to interview UK activists. With the Daily Mail additionally writing, White House says it's monitoring Lucy Connolly's case after her bid to be freed from prison over a racist tweet was quashed. How did we get here? Seemingly, it all started after JD Vance's speech at Munich's security conference back in February 2025.
The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America.
Later that month, Keir Starmer refuted the notion that Britain has a free speech problem at the Oval Office.
In relation to free speech in the UK, I'm very proud of our history there.
Fast forward to April, and I brought the issue up with Press Secretary Caroline Levitt at the White House.
Would the Trump administration consider political asylum for British citizens in such a situation?
Well, to your latter question, it's a very good one. I have not heard that proposed to the president, nor have I spoken to him about that idea. But I certainly can and talk to our national security team and see if it's something the administration would entertain.
I asked Levitt whether free speech would be part of the trade deal, as VP JD Vance had insisted it would be. No free speech, no deal, he said it again and again, and it turned out it was not part of the deal at all. And this was confirmed by Secretary of Commerce Howard Lutnick.
Yeah, that was not part of the conversation. Our conversation was an economic conversation from start to finish.
Last week, prominent political commentator Charlie Kirk visited the UK and claims the UK has fallen.
They're in the abyss, but culturally, there is this kind of silent, are we allowed to say this? Are we allowed to challenge this? Are we allowed to talk about this? Are we allowed to question this?
Even his appearance on GB News went viral.
She's carrying out her 2.5-year sentence for solitary tweets,
so outrageous,
which she deleted four hours later. What's your take on the whole situation?
Well, I'm going to try to get the U.S. State Department involved. I don't know if you know what their bandwidth is here, but I'm sorry. Like, again, I'm speaking as a citizen, not as a U.S. government. I just want to be very clear. Like, is this a way that a liberal democracy and an ally of the United States acts? Just to be clear, what she said would not be any prison time in America. I don't like what she said. And by the way, just to be clear, you guys have the wrong incitement threshold. In America, you need to have specific time and specific place in order to reach the incitement threshold. Every day people say, well, someone should go kill Charlie Kirk. I don't like it, but that's protected speech. In America, we care about what you do, not about what you say. And then she showed contrition and she apologized. And from my understanding, when the police force showed up to her door, they asked her questions being like, do you think that, do you hate immigrants? No, she gave like very satisfactory answers and they still arrested her. And I just find it so outrageous that she's going to now jail for 2.5 years for a deleted social media post that she apologized for. As you guys have birthed free speech to the world, you now guys are becoming a totalitarian country.
Now, before we get into Charlie's breakdown and examples, let's see how the media is covering Lucy Connolly's story. Left-leaning Wales Online ran the headline, "Lucy Connolly loses bid to appeal against sentence for racial hatred tweet." Now let's use Ground News to see how the rest of the media is covering the story. We specifically partnered with Ground News because their app and website allow me and my team to cut through media bias and get a full picture of any story in the news cycle. In this case, there are over 35 articles published worldwide on Lucy Connolly's rejected appeal, and we can access every single one through Ground News, complete with source, context, and lean ratings. Meanwhile, right-leaning Breitbart ran the headline, "Two-tier justice. UK mother jailed for tweet loses appeal for early release." A stark contrast to Wales Online's framing, and a perfect example of how the same story can be told in very different ways. Seeing all sides, regardless of political lean, is crucial for making informed decisions and cutting through bias. That's why Ground News's blind spot feed, which highlights stories underreported by either side, is so valuable. Take this, for example. Trump's deployment of a free speech monitoring team to the UK hasn't been covered by any left or centre-leaning outlets. That's the kind of insight Ground News makes easy to uncover. I genuinely believe in what Ground News is doing, and I encourage you to check it out by scanning the QR code or visiting ground.news/Winston. If you subscribe through my link, you'll get 40% off unlimited access. Ground News is subscriber funded, and by supporting my sponsors, you are supporting this show. Let's take a closer look at the case of Lucy Connolly. For people that don't know Lucy Connolly's case, she was sentenced to 2.5 years for a 51-word tweet. She tweeted, "Mass deportation now, set fire to all the fucking hotels, full of the bastards, for all I care. While you're at it, take the treacherous government and politicians with them. I feel physically sick knowing what these families will now have to endure. If that makes me racist, so be it." Not a very nice tweet, and certainly not one I endorse, but 2.5 years, and who could forget that this was directly after the horrific killings in Southport by Axel Ruder-Cabana at the Taylor Swift dance party where 3 young girls were killed. The whole country was grieving, and clearly Lucy Connolly was as upset as the rest of us. And it's not just Lucy Connolly. Here's another more recent example covered by GB News.
Dozens of British people every day are being arrested by Stasi police forces for thought crimes in Britain. One of the most prominent recent examples was that of retired Special Constable Julian Fawkes, who was handcuffed at his home by Kent Police after he replied to pro-Palestinian activists on X. He was interrogated and given a caution, but not before officers ransacked his home and commented on his, quote, Brexity books.
In cuffs. The rest of the officers all piled in past me. And for the next hour and a half, I sat with one of the officers while his colleagues, the other 5, basically went through every room, every drawer, wardrobe, cupboard in my house. They were in the loft, they were in the garage, they were in the garden shed.
Two-tier justice is also at play. These cases were not themselves violent acts. However, let's look at some recent violent crime convictions by comparison and their sentencing. Rhys Newman, 33, is a child rapist who was spared jail due to the prison overcrowding crisis. Sam Sharma, 34, got a 3-year sentence for drugging and sexually assaulting a 14-year-old girl. Iqbal Chand, 31, a migrant who sexually assaulted a 14-year-old girl, has avoided jail. Abu Wadi, 33, who arrived illegally on a small boat, voiced support for Hamas and the murder of Jews, was given 9 months. Antonio Boparan, then 19, who got 18 months for killing a girl in a car accident when he was driving 70 in a 30. Boparan was sentenced by the same judge who sentenced Lucy Connolly. In the end, Boparan served only 6 months. Even Labour councillor Ricky Jones's trial has been delayed until August after he said,
"And we need to cull their throats and get rid of them all."
And you may remember this video from May 2021.
Stop the movement, stop all of them, stop their mothers, stop their daughters, and show the support for Palestine. Shut them up, rape their daughters, if you have to send a message like that.
All men involved were arrested, but since have had all their charges dropped. Matt Goodwin wrote in the Daily Mail that Lucy Connolly was given a longer sentence than some members of a Pakistani grooming gang who sexually abused children. In 2003, Victoria Agolia, a rape gang victim, died after being injected with heroin by Mahmoud Yaqub. He was later jailed for 3.5 years for injecting her with a noxious substance after being cleared of manslaughter. The list goes on. But back to Lucy Connolly. A recent guest of the show, Andrew Doyle, explains there is no evidence that tweets such as hers even directly lead to violence.
It's not that I disagree. It's just that there's been over 6 decades of research into media effects theories, and we know that there is no direct causal effect between what people post online or indeed what people consume in popular culture and real-world harm. That's been long discredited, which is why it wasn't introduced in any of the court cases. Let's take, for example, Lucy Connolly. She posted a very horrible tweet that I agree with you was appalling, 31 months in prison. There is no evidence whatsoever that her tweet led to any violence, and that has been conceded by the prosecution. We are basing all of this on speculation.
But it's not just hurdy words, it's also silent prayer. Most recently, a Mrs. Doherty, a 74-year-old woman who was arrested in February 2025 outside a Glasgow hospital for holding a non-coercive pro-life sign, violating Scotland's safe access zone laws. In 2022, Isabel Vaughan Spruce was arrested for silent prayer outside an abortion clinic. She was let off in 23, but fast forward to 24, and Adam Smith Connor endured 2 years of legal proceedings, 3 days of a trial, and a criminal conviction for 3 minutes of silent prayer. But don't worry, not all prayer is illegal. There was no such legal proceedings for those praying on their knees towards Mecca outside the Israel embassy in Kensington on October 8th, 2023. Whilst others were jubilantly chanting Allah Akbar in celebration, I might note. So what is Trump doing? The issue of silent prayer is what Trump's new free speech team has been investigating specifically in Britain, as The Telegraph reports. A 5-person team from the US State Department spent days in the country and interviewed campaigners to feed back to the White House. They met with 5 activists who had been arrested for silently praying outside abortion clinics across Britain. The diplomats from the US Bureau of Democracy, Human Rights and Labour, DRL, travelled to London in March in an effort to affirm the importance of freedom of expression in the UK and across Europe. Led by Samuel Sampson, a senior advisor in the State Department, they met with officials from the Foreign Office and challenged Ofcom on the Online Safety Act, which is thought to be a point of contention in the White House. Here's previous guest Lord Toby Young explaining the powers Ofcom have under the Online Safety Act.
Ofcom forcing social media companies to remove this extremist content from social media platforms on pain of being fined, 5% of their annual global turnover, which is what Ofcom now has the power to do, or will shortly have the power to do under the Online Safety Act. So it seemed to be part of a strategy to suppress what the government thinks of as dangerous content on social media, even if the content isn't itself unlawful.
So the contention is the grey area as to which country's laws tech companies should abide by. This is exactly what JD Vance brought up during the meeting with Starmer at the Oval Office.
We do have, of course, a special relationship with our friends in the UK and also with some of our European allies, but we also know that there have been infringements on free speech that actually affect not just the British. Of course, what the British do in their own country is up to them, but also affect American technology companies and by extension American citizens. So that is something that we'll talk about today at lunch.
Elon Musk, the billionaire owner of X and an advisor to Mr. Trump, is among those inside the administration said to be concerned about online regulation in the UK. The delegation also quietly met with a handful of anti-abortion campaigners at an event held at a nondescript office block. So Keir Starmer has been forced to defend Britain's record of free speech, which has become a point of tension with Trump's administration officials. A State Department spokesman said US-UK relations share a mutual respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms. However, as Vice President Vance has said, we are concerned about freedom of expression in the UK. It is important that the UK respect and protects freedom of expression. Cabinet Office declined to comment. So what is the difference between the UK and US on free speech? The first glaring difference is the First Amendment. Second is the Brandenburg test, which is used in courts to understand if the speech is directed to inciting or producing imminent lawless action, and the speech is likely to incite or produce such action. As Kirk has said, nothing in Lucy Connolly's tweet would be enough to put her in jail in America. In Britain, free speech has had a long tradition of protection through the common law system, although we still had blasphemy laws until 2008 and sedition laws until 2009. We have a long history of censoriousness, just as we have a long history of great works defending free speech from the likes of John Milton, John Locke, and John Stuart Mill. Part of the reason America has the amendment is because they understood British censorship before their independence. Where the First Amendment tempered censorship and bred a culture of free speech in America, in Britain, since the Second World War, a mountain of censorious laws accreted, in part inspired by the belief that hurty words inevitably lead to the Holocaust and the wrong lessons learned after the war, and in part to deal with the community tensions that grew with increased migration. The Public Order Act 1986, Malicious Communications Act 1988, Protection from Harassment Act 1997, Crime and Disorder Act 1998, Communications Act 2003, Racial and Religious Hatred Act 2006, Terrorism Act 2000 and Terrorism Act 2006, Online Safety Act 2023, and there's more. The Public Spaces Protection Order, the PSPOs, which is what was used to clamp down on silent prayer were introduced under the Antisocial Behaviour Crime and Policing Act in 2014. Non-crime hate incidences were introduced in 2014. And although blasphemy laws were abolished in 2008, Labour are currently considering reintroducing Islamophobia laws. This doesn't even get into defamation, libel and contempt of court laws. I don't necessarily object to, but I mentioned to illustrate just how gargantuan is the mountain range of laws restricting speech. The only protection in Britain is via Article 10 of the Human Rights Act 1998, which incorporates the European Convention of Human Rights into domestic law. But Part B of the Act notes that a nation's laws against speech are not protected by the Act. And it gets worse. As the Free Speech Union explained, in just a few short months, Keir Starmer's Labour government has unleashed a series of shocking attacks on free speech. These include encouraging the police to record more Orwellian non-crime hate incidents, torpedoing the Freedom of Speech Act, a vital piece of legislation aimed at curbing cancel culture at universities, proposing a dangerous employment rights bill that will make employers liable if staff are offended by third parties such as customers or members of the public. This has been dubbed the banter bill. They have pledged a full trans-inclusive ban on conversion practices, which will criminalize efforts to dissuade gender-confused children from embarking on irreversible medical pathways. And there's more on the horizon. I've already mentioned their plans to criminalize Islamophobia, threatening freedom of religion and belief, embedding divisive critical race theory into workplaces through a proposed Race Equality Act. They want to expand the Online Safety Act, compelling social media platforms to censor lawful speech deemed harmful by the government, threatening press freedom with efforts, to force newspaper under a state-controlled press regulator. So, where does that leave us? Brits are getting locked up for hurty words, while literal violent criminals are avoiding jail in some cases or getting reduced sentences. And it might be the case that the White House and State Department are continuing to monitor Lucy Connolly's case.
Thanks, Donald.
But will we see political asylum for Brits prosecuted for their speech? Well, despite the America First approach, the Trump administration have accepted a group of 59 white South Africans that were victims of racial discrimination. Could Britain be next? The story does seemingly show the Trump administration's willingness to intervene in domestic British affairs.
Donald, thank you so much.
Let me know in the comments what you think. For the Brits, do you want America involved in our domestic affairs? And for the Americans, would you accept Brits into your country that have been persecuted for their speech? Also, if you enjoyed the video, make sure to like and subscribe. But until next time, be well.